Hi and welcome back. Andy Franco with the iConnect Zone in District 49. Today we are on session 3 of our board development training. We are going to be discussing policies, waivers, and effective committees. In this session, participants will learn about developing board policies and how to work through policy issues when they arise. In addition, participants will learn about the charter school waiver process and how to establish and run effective committees. To get started, let's talk a little bit about policy governance. To give you some ideas about what a policy governance board should do and should not do, I've created a few lists here. So let's talk through the things that the policy governance board should do. First and foremost, it's really important to clearly define the separation of roles and responsibilities between the board and the school administration. The board should lead by delegating, not by being involved in the day-to-day operations. That's the principal's job or the head of school's job. But you should oversee the policies that run the structure of the school. Policies are written in the affirmative and the positive. These are the things that you should do, not the things that you should not do. All right, policy governance. Let's take a look at the list of things the board should not do. First and foremost, the board should not micromanage. It's not up to the board to drive the school from the board position. Boards should not muddle descriptions of roles and responsibilities. Stick to your roles and make sure that your administration sticks to their role. The board should not get overly involved in the implementation process. That's really an administrative decision. That's how they function. And finally, the board should not get distracted from the core function of leadership and oversight. As the policy governance board, it's your job to stick to the mission and vision of the school that you're operating. So where do we start? Well, there are some legal requirements for boards, all right? And first and foremost, it should be a non-discrimination type of setting. There's schools' legal status that needs to be adhered to, and there needs to be financial transparency. Next, you really need to consider the values of your school, the instructional philosophy, how the board communicates its plan, and should there be things like student uniforms and different types of things that you want to be unique to your school. What do you value as a board? That's something that you really need to consider. And finally, you need to consider the operational aspects of your school. How are you going to govern the student record policies, the retention policies, student discipline? Those are functions of the board to decide what your philosophy is, and then it would be up to the board to develop a policy that the administration would then operate from. Here's some helpful tips. Implement practices to periodically review all policies to make sure they're current and effective. This should be done at least annually. And oftentimes, some policies will need to be reviewed more regularly. Next, draft all policies with a stated purpose and the board's values to lead the policy off. It's really important to understand the why that the policy exists. Again, sometimes that will be because it's a legal requirement. Sometimes it will be a value of the board, or sometimes it will be an operational need. Policies may originate from administration, constituents, or board members. It's not up to the board to always come up with the ideas around what policies are needed. You should really involve your additional stakeholders when addressing policy initiatives. When addressing board matters, try to ensure there is policy to determine how future issues are addressed, or reference a policy in responding to a question. Utilize administration and board members to prepare initial drafts. This should not be done in board meetings. Do this outside of the board meetings and then bring recommendations or proposals to the board meetings for consideration and approval. And then finally, here's the most important tip. Don't reinvent the wheel. Research other policies. There are a lot of charter schools in Colorado and throughout the nation, and there are likely policies in place for just about every topic that you can think of. So research first, then draft, then approve and revise. When considering policy practices, it's important to understand the administrative procedures and how they complement the board policy. So consider this. The board sets policy. the administration develops procedures to carry out the policy. Most often, conflict occurs when the board policy and administrative procedure are out of sync. What this means is that the expectations are either unclear or the board sometimes dabbles in the operations of administering or implementing the policy, or the administration doesn't implement policy and they create their own rules. So establishing the right relationship between the administration and the board is critical, and understanding that the administration needs to develop procedures to carry out the policies that the board has approved is the right sequence. Effectively using policy is something that needs to be considered as well. Best practice includes strong communication of policy. This would include posting your policies to your website, making policies available in the school office, and developing handbooks to send home with students and/or employees. Next, it's important to periodically review your policies. Laws and even best practices are constantly evolving and being refined. Work with your administrators or your attorney to develop a system to regularly review policies on a schedule. Handbooks, such as the student handbook or the staff handbook, they should be reviewed annually. The next topic we want to cover in this session is about waivers. Waivers are the technical means by which charter schools are able to innovate. They allow a school to waive out of mandates and requirements in state statutes. There are two types of waivers. First, there's the automatic waiver, and then there's the non-automatic waiver. Since waivers allow a charter school to function differently, a written policy is often required to provide rationale for the waiver. This is referred to as the rationale replacement plan. Replacement policies are always required for non-automatic waivers from the state law and may be required for the charter authorizer. In District 49, we require all waivers from state law to have a written replacement and rationale plan, and those must be filed with the authorizer before they are approved into the contract. We can conduct off-cycle waivers when there is a request or a law has changed, but this does need to be first approved through the charter board, and then the waiver needs to be submitted to the charter authorizer, which will then be approved by the charter authorizing Board of Education. Once approved by the Board of Education, the waiver is submitted to the state, and the State Board of Education will approve it as well. Waivers are often negotiated during the initial charter contract or the renewal process. As stated, in special circumstances, we will approve waivers off-cycle. Finally, we want to cover the concept of committees. Best practices around committee work include the concepts of standing versus ad hoc committees, codifying the committee's purpose, determining the structure, the accountability, reporting frequency with content and the representation on the committee, report in writing for board packets, and then every few years verify the committee is still fulfilling its original purpose. The difference between a standing and an ad hoc committee is frequency of need. So, for instance, the best example of a standing committee is your finance committee. This is a committee that would meet monthly and conduct a report to the board as a whole during your monthly meetings. An ad hoc committee meeting might consist of a revision to a uniform policy, or a committee to consider bringing on a fundraising activity, something that's going to be less frequent and not consistently needed for the board to consider. Whether it is a standing committee or an ad hoc committee, you really need to make sure you understand the committee's purpose, define what the committee will do, and define what they will not do. Committee reports are an important part of your board meeting. Committees are not designed to make decisions on their own, but they bring information back to the entire board about what's been discussed and what are the proposed outcomes from their work. It is up to the board to approve any action that comes out of committee work, and so that really needs to come back to the entire board before any action is taken. Every few years, take the time to really evaluate your committee work and make sure that you've got the right committees in place. And of course, as topics arise, you will establish the ad hoc committees to fit the needs of your board work. So this session really has covered a lot of information about policy development and about waivers and about committee work. Today's assignments include two things. First and foremost, we want to make sure that you understand how to develop policy. So we've created a worksheet for you to consider. Take a look at either an existing policy that your board operates from, or if there is a need for a new policy, consider that policy as well. We want you to fill out this form that's included in this slide, but also included in the Schoology folder. We want you to understand what will be needed to really draft up a policy that is either in existence and needs revision or a policy that needs to be created. So take the time to work through that policy worksheet and submit that into the folder when you've completed. The next assignment I want you to conduct is to do a review of your school's waivers. If you log into the Colorado Department of Education's website using this link provided, you will find a list of all of the waivers that are supported through state board approval for each charter school. You can scroll through that list and find your school's name. They're listed alphabetically, and then you will find the statute code that has been waived. You can reference that code back to the title in the beginning part of the document to understand what those waivers are for. So do a cursory review of each of the waivers that your charter school has applied for and has received through the process. I hope you've enjoyed this session. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope these assignments will also bring you more learning. We'll look forward to seeing you in session 4.